Thank you. Okay, thank you. Welcome back. So when we left off, where were we? We were zipping around on the interwebs. We were knowing more than human beings have ever known. We had the need, no, the right to be unlimited. If only we got the right cell phone plan. In lecture 1, we talked about the sizzle that technology companies are selling, and that it is at kind of the deepest and most subtle level a story about our own limitations and how we can transcend them. I also briefly mentioned in lecture 1 that there was something a little bit theologically suspect about the sizzle that tech companies are selling. So now let's turn to Genesis 3 to see what the problem is there. Now, the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God say, 'You shall not eat from any tree in the garden'?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die.' But the serpent said to the woman, 'You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.'" What a promise. Your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God. If we fast forward to the year of our Lord 2025, those two promises, the promises that the serpent made to Eve, have become facts of everyday life. Again, phenomenologically speaking, how we sort of experience the world. Again, or if we're not already gods, the hope is that we will be in the near future. And our eyes have been opened. Boy, have they ever been opened. I'm going to read another quotation now, and I'm not going to put it on the PowerPoint because it's from a draft of a novel called Underworld by Don DeLillo, and I don't want to push it on the fair use quotation here. So, quote, "Everything is visible. Visibility is a disease, a contamination. Cover your eyes," she wanted to cry. "The more you see, the sooner you die. Too much visible reality. All the reality concealed for centuries has burst into visibility. You can see everything that has always been hidden: sex, madness, cancer cells, torture, poverty, shame. Under the ocean, in the brain, it's an epidemic of seeing. The human heart exposed like a pig's muscle on a slab. The cruelty of seeing everything, the inexpressible damage to the soul. Don't look," she wanted to cry into the twilight. "Birth, rape, outer space, suicide in your face if you're not careful. They've taken all the things that were hidden away and pressed them in your face." End quote. Believe it or not, I actually edited that passage to make it a little bit less horrifying. Like there were worse parts. But you'll have to go to the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas at Austin to see the rest of it. But from what I've read, you can still see what DeLillo's point is, which was maybe also God's point in Genesis in telling Adam and Eve to please just avoid that one tree. And the point is that we as human beings don't really need to know everything or to see everything. We don't actually have that need, and we certainly don't have that right. If we are Christians, then we believe that some limitations have been put on us as human beings for our own good. Again, this is kind of to speak to the overlap or the complication, the Christian way is not the genie in a bottle way, right? Like, it is a way of limitation. It is a way of the cross. It is a way of sacrifice. When Adam and Eve eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the serpent is kind of right. Like, they don't die immediately, but they do immediately discover that they are naked. Shame enters the world. Then right after that, fear and evasion enter the world as Adam and Eve hide from God when he takes his evening stroll in the garden. Blame comes into the world right after that. When God asks what happens, Adam's knee-jerk response is to blame Eve and even God himself. Quote, The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit from the tree, and I ate. If it wasn't already bad enough, this is now officially the worst Valentine's Day lecture imaginable. I'm really sorry about that. Eve then blames the serpent. The serpent tricked me, and I ate. After they admit what they've done, God issues their punishment. The pain of childbirth for Eve, thorns, thistle, and toil for Adam, eternal wrangling between their offspring and the offspring of the serpent. But this punishment, I would suggest, is also their cure. In fact, it's a reformulation of God's original blessing in Genesis 1. Quote, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it.'" After the fall, it's the same plan. It doesn't change. Have children, build houses and dwell in them, plant gardens and eat their fruit, help your children to grow up and have families of their own, seek peace even in exile. Now, I wasn't recapping Genesis 1 there. I'm paraphrasing the prophet Jeremiah, who predicted the Babylonian exile. Adam and Eve were exiled from Eden. The Israelites were exiled and enslaved in Egypt and then in Babylon. We too, in 2025, live in exile. We're not home yet. We're pilgrims on the way, which is why we can't jump ahead. So let's hold on to some hope from the recognition that after the fall, God's plan for humanity is exactly the same as it was before the fall. The difference, from what I understand, is that now the work of building homes and families is much harder going, and it requires a lot more effort from us with sin and death in the world. But I still think it's kind of beautiful that God invites us to participate in the work of redemption in this way. Not that we earn our redemption or anyone else's. I'm not a trained theologian. There are some of those in the room too. I don't put them on the spot, but I don't mean to accidentally veer into heresy here. So let me, Devin's laughing, let me know if I go too far. But what I mean to say is I think it's beautiful that Jesus does the work, and yet he still invites us to be workers in the vineyard. He is the vine and we are the branches. So that kind of starts to draw out some of the problems with the story that technology is telling us, or rather selling us. First, by flattering us into believing that we can transcend human limitations and become like gods, it's tricking us into becoming something not more than human, I would argue, but less than human. And we'll come back to that in a moment. Second, by distracting us, technology is, as a general rule, taking us out of the vineyard. And I will admit, like the marketing thing, you can find exceptions to this rule. There are priests and nuns and Protestant theologians whose accounts I follow on Twitter, and I have truly learned and grown from their wisdom and their witness. So, again, far be it from me to put a limit on God by suggesting that he can do no good through the internet or social media or electronic communications. And that's a big mellowing if you've heard me talk about technology for 10 years. That's a big thing for me to be like, no, I think even God can find good things in this terrain. In fact, he seems to be calling some people specifically to an apostolate in virtual realms. I'm thinking of the Daughters of St. Paul. You probably know other groups. But for the rest of us, and I guess that's the vast majority of Christian believers, the time we spend online is more likely to be a distraction from the work of kingdom building than to be part of it. I won't cite statistics on screen time use. If you want to read a good account of how we interact with screens and the time that we spend on them, especially how young people interact with screens, I highly recommend Jonathan Haidt's new book, The Anxious Generation. Haidt isn't religious, but apparently he told a group of Catholic educators a week or so ago that faith is the antidote to technology. And I just happened to hear about this from chatting with the principal at my daughter's school. She participated in the online webinar, and we were both kind of marveling at the fact that a secular social psychologist is telling Catholic educators to keep up the good work and fight the good fight. And so he's coming at it from a different angle, the tech angle, but there really is a tension there in what screens pull us toward and what is actually healthy for us and society. So I won't put in a bunch of statistics because you can find them elsewhere and they're really depressing. Not that I'm sparing you like unhappy subject matter. And they're also kind of superfluous. I think we can all like intuit and admit, if we're being honest, that we spend too much time on our devices and that life really like hasn't improved since the widespread adoption of smartphones in the early 2010s. Our attention spans are getting shorter. I feel it even for myself, and I try to be on guard against the wiles of technology. Our tempers seem to be getting shorter. Faith, hope, and charity do not appear to be on the rise in the United States in the 21st century. And I would argue that part of the problem, at least, is that technology is luring us away from the kinds of old-fashioned toil and stewardship that enable us to cooperate with God's will and to reclaim what was lost in the fall. I guess paper is a technology too. Instead, technology is doing the opposite. It's telling us to double down and dig deeper into original sin, into pride and selfishness. And consequently, it's bringing about more and more of the bad things we saw in Genesis 3: shame, blame, fear, evasion. By encouraging us to bypass the work of toil and love that we are called to in a fallen world and go straight for transcendence in the cloud, technology is selling us the sizzle of heaven, but the steak that we're eating, unfortunately, actually looks a lot more like hell. I know, just when you thought you couldn't regret this date night decision anymore. In 2021, I published an essay in Plow magazine called Hard Liberty, the Hellish Internet's False Promise. And so I'll give you like kind of an overview of part of what I argued there. This is where my theory that the internet resembles hell, or at least hell as it was portrayed in two works of early modern British literature, this is where it came from. And in the spring of 2021, I spoke to students at the Brearley School, which is an all-girls private school in New York that a friend of mine teaches at. And they were 100, because they were reading Paradise Lost, they were like 100% on board. They were like, yes, the internet is hell. And they were like 15 or 16. And their experience of it was different from mine, but they had this sense of being reformed and reshaped in ways that they didn't feel that they had totally signed up for or agreed to. And it was like something with like, it was like styling and like eyeshadow, so it like went way over my head. But they were really worried about it, and they were frighteningly receptive to the argument. And what I am arguing in Plow is premised on the belief that great literature can be prophetic. And by prophetic, I don't necessarily mean that it can predict the future, although sometimes that happens, especially with sci-fi. I mean that the writer, by looking at everyday events with a prophet's eye, can see deeply into things and connect them with metaphysical, eternal truths that otherwise escape our gaze and go unnoticed. Again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but here's sort of the gist of a little bit of it. So John Milton was an English poet and civil servant. Paradise Lost is probably his best-known work. It was published in 1667. The poem ambitiously expands chapter 3 of Genesis into thousands of lines of epic verse in order to tell the story of two falls, Satan's from heaven and Adam and Eve's in the Garden of Eden. A few decades before that, in 1592, Dr. Faustus, a play by another English writer, Christopher Marlowe, had its debut performance. In both Paradise Lost and Dr. Faustus, I mean, you can see them too. We're not going to hang out with them for too long, though, don't worry. The possibility of becoming like God is what tempts men and angels, in both the poem and the play, into damnation. That's the thing that tricks them. They think they can become like God. Once they are under the spell of the serpent, pride and despair are what bid them stay. Paradise Lost opens in medias res, in the middle of things, just after Satan, or Lucifer, I guess, and the other rebel angels have been cast down from heaven and into a lake of fire. Here's a print of it from, I don't actually know what year. Dazed by their defeat and bewildered by the dismal surroundings and their own transformation into new and hideous shapes, the fallen angels slowly reform into ranks and debate what to do next. One of the fallen angels, Moloch, urges them all on to a new battle. Another one, Belial, argues against further war, but not because he's motivated by piety and repentance. He's just lazy, and he's afraid they're going to be punished even worse if they fail a second time. The third fallen angel to speak offers a different reason for staying put, one that conveniently allows those who share Belial's laziness and cowardice to disguise their flaws as pride. Who wants heaven anyway? This third angel essentially asks, when we could be our own bosses in hell. To return would mean singing warbled hymns and forced alleluias to an envied sovereign. Or to put it in like modern parlance, like they're saying they can't praise God. They don't want to acknowledge that he's better, kinder, smarter, more powerful, more loving, more everything, because he is existence itself. So this fallen angel says that they should do away with servile offerings and splendid vassalage. I'll put the words up here so you can see. Milton's syntax is not the easiest to follow, and when I did my job talk here, I watched everybody get really sleepy for the Shakespeare and then come right back. So bear with me as we go through Paradise Lost for a couple minutes. All right. So the third fallen angel instead proposes that they rather seek our own good from ourselves, and from our own live to ourselves, though in this vast recess, free and to none accountable, preferring hard liberty before the easy yoke of servile pomp. I'm like, what's a good gloss on this that I didn't write out in advance? He can't fathom admiration. He can't fathom that there would be anyone to worship and mean it. And so he's like, well, let's just live in this hollow void for a while. Then we don't have to answer to anybody. So he's arguing that although hell is, he acknowledges, an inhospitable vacuum, at least nobody else is there to tell them what to do. Like a perverse real estate agent, he goes on to frame hell as a potential fixer-upper. This desert soil wants not her hidden luster, gems of gold. Let's keep digging in the vacuum and see what's there. Then he kind of channels his inner life coach to say that if anybody can rehab the place, it's them. Quote, nor want we skill or art from whence to raise magnificence. Come on, let's put our heads together and build. An aside, Hannah Arendt has a beautiful passage about modern life becoming like a desert. And that one problem is, we can still build. We can try to build an oasis. But one problem that she saw in the 20th century was that we were sort of being told to eat sand and like it. Instead of building, to just go with that, desert void that we find ourselves in. Somewhat less inspiringly than this passage, the third angel concludes that fallen angel concludes that if their plan fails, one upshot is that they might get used to living in misery. Quote, our torments may also, in length of time, become our elements. These piercing fires, as soft as now severe, our temper changed into their temper. His speech is met with rapturous applause. His name, perhaps prophetically, is Mammon. Again, it's this idea that if we just hang out in the desert long enough, we'll again, eating sand. 3.5 centuries later, I think it seems to me that we live in a culture that's just as determined as the builders of pandemonium to, quote, seek our own good from our own selves. This failure to recognize external goods outside of our own heads consists of turning away not only from God, but of rebellion against any forms of authority at all, whether they are parental, moral, educational, or medical. More and more these days, I feel like you can find evidence that the dictates and whims of every individual consciousness, however misguided or misinformed or even malicious, are held as sacrosanct. So much so that not even the blessings of this age, like vaccinations that could prevent children from dying of preventable illnesses, seem poised to escape what Paul calls the mystery of lawlessness. One problem is that what remains when laws are abolished is not freedom, but rather bondage to harmful internal and external forces that a properly developed conscience would keep in check. All those thistles, all those thorns, all those little sacrifices that we are required to make on a daily basis as mothers and fathers, teachers and coaches, all of those annoying, difficult things, that love of God's creation and our fellow creatures made in the image of God, all of those things are precisely what help us learn to counteract the selfishness and the pridefulness of original sin. It's good that it takes so much effort and hard work to love. That's a great workout for the soul to help get those harmful internal forces under control. But all you got to do to opt out of all of that is just pick up your smartphone, right? Like, doesn't that just make it all go away? The annoying things for a second, or it feels like it does. But where are we really? In the void, but at least we don't have to answer to anybody. As for the external forces that we need to keep in check, medieval scholastic Peter Abelard grouped them into 3 categories: the flesh, the world, and the devil. I found a good sort of introduction to what each of those categories means in a piece from the Catholic Herald by Father John Zulsdorf. It packs a lot in every sentence, so I think we should have it up there too. By world, we intend indifference and opposition to God's design, embracing empty, passing values. By flesh, we understand the obvious tendencies to gluttony and sexual immorality, but also all our corrupt inclinations, that is, those disordered passions which blind us, make us stupid, and lay us open to greater sins. By the devil, we identify a real personal enemy, a fallen angel, the father of lies, who, with his fellow demons of hell, labors in relentless malice to twist us away from salvation. So I'll pause and let you guys think for a moment about whether smartphones and the internet are helping us check our inherent tendencies to selfishness and pride and to fight off the temptations presented to us by the world, the flesh, and the devil. My gut instinct is no. No, it's bringing it to us at every minute in every possible way. This is like kind of a unsavory anecdote, but this evening's full of unsavory anecdotes. When I was a kid, you had to, if you wanted to watch like a dirty movie, you had to go to Blockbuster or California Video, I guess. I don't know. I saw the room. I didn't go in it. And you had to go in the back room where they had those movies, right? Like there was a little bit of friction. There were some obstacles to vice. And now there are none. And that concerns me as a parent and as a teacher, that we are taking away all the things that would keep dangers and temptations from our children. And we're just handing it to them when they're, infants in some cases. So no, my gut instinct is that technology is not helping, and it's making things much, much worse by promising that we can just sidestep the purposefully difficult exile of life here below and jump straight to heaven in the cloud. When we try to do that, what we actually get, if Milton is right, is more like this. Right? Like, I don't really love this kind of humor, and you guys won't hear about it because I'm still working that out. I haven't written it down yet. But I just feel like this is a use of comedy that makes me uncomfortable. And I think part of that is I don't like that the dog stays in hell. I think if we're in hell or some weird technological version of it, and we didn't talk about Marlowe, but he's got a demon, Mephistopheles, and Mephistopheles is the one who who makes Dr. Faustus sign a contract. He says, 25 years, you'll get whatever you want. All the knowledge, all the tricks, all the magic that you want. And then at the end of those 25 years, you just have to give me your immortal soul. And at one point, Faustus says, how did you get out of hell? What are you doing here? And he says, why, this is hell, nor am I out of it. Like, hell is a sort of a state of mind. It follows you around. And it freaks me out that on January 1st, 2024, my local grocery store had cakes with this on it. I'm like, this kind of humor, I'll go, but like, I'm not going to laugh out loud and I'm not going to eat it. I'm just not okay with that. I think if we're in hell, like Mephistopheles, we should get out. And have you ever seen the whole cartoon? I only saw it yesterday, so be prepared. That's the rest of the story. Now you really look like you're not having fun. Um, but it freaks me out. And it seems like kind of a good metaphor for what unnerves me about technology. There's something counterfeit about the whole arrangement. The meme of the dog in hell pretends like it's funny, it's a comedy, but then it ends as a horror movie. And the fact that we just leave that part of the story out, that doesn't make it better. That makes it worse. We need to know how this ends so we can decide if we actually want to be on this train. Similarly, technology sells us the sizzle of heaven, but then it delivers something more like the vicious infighting and endless plotting, an elaborate construction of a hollow, abstract empire that we see in John Milton's Hell. Technology promises us information, more information than ever before in human history, but then it delivers a complete absence of wisdom. Technology promises us connection, and then it delivers loneliness and alienation and solipsism. To go back to one other point from the Plow essay, I'll suggest one last unfortunate switcheroo that technology is enabling today. And that is that it seems like it's also trying to tear down every hierarchy as well as every law. But what remains when the concept of rightful authority has been dismissed, as Paradise Lost and Plato's Republic both show in very different ways, is not equality, it's tyranny. Just like no laws does not mean freedom, it means bondage to worse things. No authority doesn't mean equality, it means tyranny. It means a worse system of power. This modern impulse to do away with all laws and authority and instead to make an idol of one's own individual consciousness is really strange, given what a limited perspective each of us possesses in space and time. It's strange, too, because external goods like trees and clouds and sacraments and other people broaden and enrich our lived experience rather than constrict it. As anyone who's ever emerged from depression or grief into community and nature knows. The internet presents us with maybe the most condensed form of this mystery of lawlessness, and for lack of a better word, reverencelessness. It aligns almost exactly with what Mammon describes when he outlines his vision for a new empire in hell, a hollow vacuum in which a lack of accountability masquerades as liberty. Indeed, Milton's lines, "In this vast recess, free and to none accountable," provide a sadly accurate description of much life online these days. Think of the comments section below any article and how frequently it descends into vitriol and ad hominem attacks, or cyberbullying, or the ways in which social media has become a tool for disseminating conspiracy theories and disinformation, and for sowing familial and societal discord. Think about the nefarious uses to which tech companies are putting all the data that they've accumulated on us, monitoring and manipulating the people who use their products, and allowing other entities to do the same for a price. Do you know how many times LL Bean ads popped up on my Chrome browser since I got that sweater for the slide on Techne? The number wasn't 0. I don't know what it was. It was more than 0. It just kept coming. I mean, I feel like even Elmer Wheeler, if he were alive today, might draw a line in the sand and shout, "Stop, it's too much. Stop controlling them that way." Presumably, the designers of these online systems thought, like Mammon in Paradise Lost, that a lack of accountability might be a good thing. We can complain or accuse or ask an awkward question or follow an embarrassing impulse without anybody else seeing our faces or knowing our names. In answering to no one in this way, we are free and to none accountable. But to untether action from accountability and embodiment is to usher in chaos and misery and harm. That is a hard liberty indeed. Human beings, I would argue, were never designed to view life at a distance and through a one-way mirror, always judging and never judged. We were made to see each other, and eventually our God, face to face. I'll end this lecture with another poem by a different English poet who lived 3 centuries later. I think it captures a different kind of hard liberty, one that's probably more recognizable for us than like Mammon giving eloquent speeches in unrhymed iambic pentameter in Pandemonium. The poem was published in 1974, so well before the internet became a thing, but it captures some of the same kind of unease about a certain kind of modern freedom and whether it's really all that it's cracked up to be. it also captures, I think, the claustrophobia of sin. And it has like one bad word and some mature content, so I apologize for that. I almost didn't include it in case there were any tender young people in the audience, but then I realized the sad reality of contemporary American youth is that statistically speaking, most young people have probably seen and heard much, much worse things on the internet, probably even earlier today. And the poem is called High Windows by Philip Larkin. I'm sorry that this is like a vision test, but I didn't want to mess up the line breaks because it's a poem and you have to preserve the line breaks. So when I see High Windows, when I see a couple of kids and I guess he's her and she's taking pills or wearing a diaphragm, I know this is paradise everyone old has dreamed of all their lives. Bonds and gestures pushed to one side like an outdated combine harvester, and everyone young going down the long slide to happiness endlessly. I wonder if anyone looked at me 40 years back and thought, that'll be the life. No God anymore, sweating in the dark about hell and all that, or having to hide what you think of the priest. He and his lot will all go down the long slide like free bloody birds. And immediately, rather than words, comes the thought of high windows, the sun-comprehending glass, and beyond it, the deep blue air that shows nothing and is nowhere and is endless. I don't want to rub the powder off the butterfly's wings by dissecting this poem too closely, but I would at least suggest that it's the opposite of a Wheeler point. It's not flashy or sneaky. It's not trying to make you do things without you noticing. It's making overt demands on you to listen, to pay attention, to follow a line of thought from beginning to end, to not give up at the first whiff of scandal in that first stanza, which even as I was reading it, I was like, do I regret this decision? And I think it's the opposite of the dog in hell meme. It takes time and effort to get the poem as opposed to that, and then you're done with the this is fine. I'm not sure I fully do get the poem, but it leaves me with a sense of a truer and more lasting, with the sense that a truer and more lasting kind of freedom is possible. It doesn't say this is fine. It says this might not be fine after all. Look up. Look out. Let's get out of here. The end. Thank you. Sorry. Talk 3 is shorter, so this Q&A is a little short, but the next one will be too long.
Sounds good. All right, we got 5 or 6 minutes for questions. Got one in the far back over there.
Thank you for sacrificing your time to come and share this evening with us. I appreciate it. So I'd like to ask you a little something that's maybe out of your wheelhouse, a specialty. I'm thinking specifically about, there's a lot that's been written for and against the so-called like marketing of the church. And this is much more prevalent in like Protestant evangelical circles, maybe especially because we lack a robust sacramentality that tethers us to like real presence. But the idea that, you know, like we expand our reach for the gospel, we transcend our limits of place and time, and all of these pastors and church leaders are advocating that we, you know, like you have to have an online presence. You have to have an online ministry, which you would probably agree is not necessarily all bad, but I'll just leave it at that. I'd like to hear your thoughts and your comments on that.
That's such a fascinating question. I recently, in the last 2 years, converted to the Catholic Church, and I will say, like, they do not advertise, like, they don't even do what the Episcopalians do, which is give you like a nice little order of worship every week. Like, you just have to hang in there till you memorize what the other people are saying. And so there could be a connection between the advertising versus the robust sacramentality. There was a sense that the sacrament would speak for itself, and a little bit of, you know, humility in learning the ropes there. So I hadn't thought about that, but I could see it. I don't know, because I'm not a good marketer, what any particular church should do. I will say that Marshall McLuhan sort of weighed in on religion a little bit, and he thought that the Christian faith should not try to outculture the culture, because you're never going to do it. Like, the culture is going to beat you. Like, they've got the top minds making whatever cultural, water we're swimming in even more like it already is. And so he thought it was not the time to do, I guess, like worship bands or acoustics. He thought it was the time to like double down on vestments, like look different, sound different, be a different place so that someone had something to go to. I don't know what to say about the advertisements, though. I guess I'm going to kick it to James Hunter's idea of faithful presence, which is wherever you are, God put you there. Wherever you are, there is some role for you to do good. And I mean, I've thought about that for like a long time with respect to faith. Like, there are so many kinds of blue jeans and there are so many kinds of music. Like, God will reach people in different ways. And far be it from me to work out what that is. So it's like, I would want a robust online presence, and I would want the doors open, like, because I think we have to people are so lost and they're so miserable. I can't see worrying too much. Like, I don't know. I don't have an answer, but for me, when I don't know, the first thing I want to do is like listen. I want to be like, what's it like on the ground? Like, I used to have students and they would tell me the horror stories. They'd be like, ma'am, did you know kids don't play Barbies anymore? They watch other kids play Barbies on YouTube. And I would say, no, that's horrible. And they would bring me these things like a bouquet of flowers, or like a cat that dropped a little mouse at the door. They would bring me the horror stories. So I would say, how do you find the people? And I think that's something everyone's asking right now. The college Republicans and the college Democrats both are not getting attendees at their meetings. And it's like, how do you get them out of the rooms where they're like this? And maybe you have to go on kind of a rescue mission. I don't know. That was a lot of words for not a lot of coherent thoughts. I'm sorry. But I want to keep thinking.
We're here in the back.
Thanks, Cassandra. So in beginning of your first lecture, and towards the end too, I was thinking, okay, so this is about a loss of our appetite for like the layers of fiction, for instance, and everything is just flattened and easier. And this technology has sort of made us atrophy in that sense, and we just have less of an appetite. But now in the second lecture, you had this great line about technology taking us out of the vineyard, or out of toiling, essentially too. And so you framed it more as like, this is just actually an eternal problem, and this is Milton's Paradise Lost. Like, this is just happening. But you're also saying that it's really giving us this illusion of lack of toil, or an illusion of omniscience. Like, how is the world going to end or something? And you can just look it up, and then there's this really certain answer. And so, like, what is it? Both of those? Is it both that we're just losing our appetite, or things worse, or is this just an eternal problem and it's just more acute now? So,
I feel like. Sorry, I'm trying to write something down before I forget. I have an advisor, and I've been in a real Debbie Downer for a while now, and so I'd be like, I'm really worried about this, and he would say, it was ever thus. Most books that have ever been published are bad. Most plays that have ever been performed are bad. It was, it's ever thus. And so I do think, like, yeah, our problems are perennial ones because we're human beings, and we have original sin, and we want to take the path of least resistance. Like, I personally always want to take the path of least resistance, and it's like a reverse illusion, I think, in the Christian faith, where I'm like, I don't want to go this way, and then afterwards I'm like, oh, thank you, God, I see why you did that. Like, it feels like drudgery at first, and C.S. Lewis has this beautiful formulation about like what we thought was a desert, the hard times in our life. When we look back, if we're on the path to salvation, we see, like, it's so eloquent, but something like what memory records as, barren desert, truthfully, we look back and see that it was filled with water. Like, so it's that switch. Like, text says, have your fun now, and then you like pay for it later. And I think faith says, pay the price now and you're going to enjoy rewards later. But I do think it was ever thus. We've always been terrible, or it tempted to become, not as much as we could be, to put it a little bit more optimistically. But I feel like the virtual realm has made things like differently bad. Like it feels like everything is accelerating in the badness, and the badness is like cropping up all over. And it takes so much work to like fix the mess that you're like, how do you do this? Like once I had a misunderstanding in a classroom with a student, and afterwards I like logged it. I was like, wow, it was like 30 seconds for us to like bother each other. And it was like 40 minutes of talking to like sort it out afterwards. And I thought, if that's the ratio for repairing connections and community, like we are like 1 trillion years in the hole as a country right now. Like, how are we going to do this? But the virtual thing, another C.S. Lewis thing, in the Screw Tape Letters, there's one letter where he says that an ever-increasing appetite for ever-diminishing returns is the formula. And what I didn't say from Paradise Lost is one punishment that Milton gives the fallen angels in hell is there's this apple tree and it looks beautiful and they lunge at it every time. And then when they eat it, it turns to dust in their mouth. And that happens over and over. So they have this like mirage, this illusion, and they never learn. And in the longer like Plow essay, the person who was scrolling for 6 hours, like the statistical, average American, who then decided to scroll for 90 minutes more, seems to me like we're doing the same thing. Like it's turning to dust in our mouths, but we're still like, yum, I'll just try to eat more of the apples, and it's never going to fill us up.